Phil. Phil, thank you for having me. I think your first question would be uh, the worst piece of advice I ever got was fake it till you make it. Because I feel that that is a very unkind piece of advice that lets a lot of people down. Because true confidence comes from competence. So that would be the worst piece of advice I've ever been given, which I do not follow.
Good. I'm glad. That is absolutely horrible advice. So, Sinjin, you have to tell people who you are in the book you wrote, though.
Sure, man. Well, thanks for having me. I have a very unusual first name. Some people say weird. I like to say unique. And I'm English by birth, that you might be able to tell. I live here in New Zealand now. And I wrote a book on the subject that I love most, which is rural sales. So anyone that's selling to farmers or ranchers. And the book's called How to Succeed in Rural Sales and the Psychology That Every Rural Rep Needs to Know. So that's the book that I put out.
Fantastic. So, I have to ask, why a book on rural selling? Because isn't it just easy to sell to farmers?
Oh, yes. I'm sure it's real easy to sell to farmers. I think farmers are, and I love that you asked that. Farmers are, I think, probably could buy you and I 10 times over, but they might not dress like that or drive the cars that would suggest that. Farmers are incredibly over advertised to, oversold to, because they represent so much money, because they obviously have that asset class and that land class. So obviously here in New Zealand, Australia, very much agrarian, agricultural based economies. Same with you in the Midwest, very big backbone of economies. And farmers are really tricky people to sell to, because they can smell bullshit from a mile off, and they are very, very, very sophisticated in the way that they buy. But I think people that don't understand that nuance sort of come unstuck.
So I grew up, my dad was a dairy farmer. Everybody in town was a dairy farmer, and they always had someone, right? They always had a guy, they had a gal. Is that still true?
Yeah, absolutely. People and relationships are everything in farming, because, people in rural are close but not closed. So they've always got a go-to guy, like their FERT rep or their feed rep or their farm machinery guy that, fixes the header at like 12:15 and midnight when they're trying to like cut canola or cotton. Like it's so tight, it's kind of self-regulating. So if you drop the ball, everyone knows. So it's kind of like a self-regulating economy. So yeah, it's tight. Relationships and people are everything. We talk about how we talk about it, Phil. We talk about faces, not faceless.
So talk to me about that. Faces, not faceless. That's interesting, right? Because right now, thankfully, we have faces, right? We're here together. We have video. But what does that mean in terms of rural American farming?
Sure. What it means is it's fronting up. So I get the opportunity, privilege to run a lot of farming panels and do a lot of farmer interviews, and we use those insights to help our clients. And what it is they buy people, because they are very much into people and relationships. It doesn't matter if you've got all the fancy stuff and all the corporate and HQ and everything else. And this is where the marketing teams kind of forget that actually it's the person that they're buying. So that is a strength and a weakness, because obviously if they buy the person, as soon as that person moves onto a role and another company, that book buying is rife, because the farmer follows the person. They build it on relationships. They build it on trust. They still have those old-fashioned values, the old school values of I'm buying you, Phil, or I'm buying you, Sinjin, and we call it the sniff test or the iometer. The iometer, like I want to look you, and we call it down under here, like we want to look you in the eyes. So and we're able to do that here, right? But they take you all in. So there's none of this kind of virtual selling. You've got to front up, and you've got to be real. You've got to be authentic, because usually they're big brawny types as well. So they'll knock your block off if you're kind of bullshitting.
Absolutely. That's funny, because I know that happened back home, right? I think about my dad even yet today. If people aren't real, if they're not authentic, I guess is the new word, right? But they're just not a real person. If they're not someone that is just a salesperson, they're not gonna sell. So one of the interesting things to me, my friend, is that you start your book, right, with why do people hate most salesperson and how to succeed in rural sales. So talk to me about that, because as a sales guy myself, I'm like, I mean, that feels true, but why is that to you?
Look, I think it's pretty much. I think you and me both know, my friend. We've been in this game for a wee while. Is that salespeople predominantly the majority fail because they're so busy serving their own best interest rather than the best interest of their buyer. And there's that whole subject which we won't have time to go on because we'll talk about other things. But like this whole thing of selling instead of serving, and I think predominantly most rural salespeople, and I don't think I'm generalizing here, but 90%, maybe 95%, we could be really fractal here, do not understand the psychology of how people buy and why they buy. And therefore, they don't serve, and instead they sell. And so what they do is they show that, back to that authentic, that real, that human-centered selling that you talk to all your wonderful guests on your show about is, hey, you're selling to a human being here. They do not have a dollar sign floating above their head. They are a human being. So have a conversation with them. Because we always say, like sales not made in the presentation, it's made in the conversation. So you've got to have a true human connection there. And that's how you sell, by servicing their needs, not yours. That might take time. It might be longer, but you play the long game because no one gets married on the first date.
Well, unless it's an arranged marriage, in which case I don't want any part of that. Let's be really clear, right? No part of that for me, man.
The irony is arranged marriages actually have a higher success rate than non-arranged marriages.
I know.
But story for another day.
All right, that'll
crazy.
Be part 2, right?
Yeah, part 2.
That's funny.
Marriage counseling with Phil and St. John.
Yeah,
not happening.
Maybe you.
Not happening.
Not me. No.
Definitely
I'm still learning. Me. I'm a rookie. So yeah, I'm not good at this. So with that, right? So you kind of alluded to this, but I love what you said in the book, and that is you said the problem with sales is selling.
100%.
Which when I read it, I was like, what the heck is this guy going for? But then I read it again. And then I read the chapter and I'm like, okay, so talk to me about that, right? The
awesome.
problem with sales is selling. What does that mean?
Yeah. The problem with sales is selling. So the more you try to sell, the less you will sell. And I almost think it should be a t-shirt, right? The problem with sales is selling. It's probably not that very interesting, but the more and more someone's selling to you, because you don't need to be Jeffrey Gitomer, who's, an absolute legend. He says something, and I'm probably doing a huge disservice misquoting him here, but he says, the problem is that no one likes to be sold to, but everyone loves to buy. So there's a whole kind of, and it's, I know it's a juxtaposition and it's a counterintuitive and contradictory, but the more you try to push and the more you try to pressure and the more you try to close, the less sales you'll make, because humans don't like to be controlled, which is back to a whole subject of signaling biosafety. There's this thing called reactance theory. It was alive and well in COVID, and it still is here and all over the world, is our respected government said, don't panic buy. So what did we do? We went and panic buy, because reactance theory is we react to being told what to do. So when someone's telling us to, you need to buy from me and I want to sell to you, then, well, I'm not in control of that. As curious, we're wired to be control freaks. So, and you can double that for my farmers, because they basically score so high on agency and autonomy. That's why they became farmers, is because they want to control everything they possibly could. But there's so much they can't. In Australia, we've had really, really bad wet, lots of floods, lots of crop damage. New Zealand's not been as bad, but we still have some rough old weather, which should be, in our spring and summer where we are now. But the reality is there's so much they can't control. So good farmers, and also good salespeople, by the way, they control the controllable. They control the controllable. And what you can control is the quality of your conversation, the quality of your questions, your planning, your preparation, your pre-call plans, your sales, the list goes on, right? So don't wing it, don't waste it, don't be selfish and short-termism kind of serving your needs. Play the longer, more generous game of serving theirs, and that's how you'll make more sales.
Yeah. Wow. Resonates so much with me. What I took something away, though. You used a stat in the book that you didn't just allude to, but I want to be clear on that. You said 95% as a rookie, right? We spend preparing, and then
Correct.
5% we spend performing. But as we get to be an expert, we spend 5% preparing and 95% performing, especially as a sales leader. So why is that? Why don't we take more time to spend more time preparing? Is it know-it-all syndrome, or what is it, St. John?
Well, sometimes it's Dunning-Kruger effect, isn't it? Overconfidence bias, right? We think we know, like because we buy things, we know how to sell things. But interestingly, there's a good delineation. I'm so glad you brought that up because I actually got that. I can't claim that. That's from a Harvard Business Review. It's a seminal article called The Corporate Athlete. And it says that athletes, as you rightly say, Phil, basically train and prepare for 95% and perform for 5%. Whereas the complete reverse in corporate world or sales, where they are literally performing 95% and only practicing and training for 5%, and the results vary. The delineation there is you can either be a sales rep, or you can be a sales professional. And a sales professional, like a pilot, like a surgeon, like a doctor, and we all know about diagnostic selling, consultative selling, challenger sell, Rackham, all that kind of stuff, is they plan and prepare. And although their lives aren't at stake, there are livelihoods, and that's being able to feed your own family because you're performing better and making more money, and you're making more money for the business that you're working for as well. So yeah, we're not saving lives, but we're definitely trying to improve livelihoods.
Well, not just our own though, right? Also the livelihoods
100%.
of those we serve, right?
Big time.
That's the
Big
important
time.
thing. We have to flip that brain that says, ooh, if only I could make $500,000 a year, to if I could just outserve my competition, if I could outserve the person in the cubicle next to me, if I could outserve that guy or gal on Slack. So why don't we though? Like, what's getting in our way, man? What gets in our way?
I think we've met the enemy, and it's us, as Pogo says, right? So the enemy is us and our own ego, and we think, well, I know it all, and I just need to make some sales, and we've got this sort of short-term quota, target-driven end of month, end of quarter, where the sales manager's riding us. What we don't understand is actually no one makes a sale until someone buys. So this whole kind of sales concept, Phil, I think almost sales permission to be brave. Like, do we need to stop using this word sales and talk about buying? Helping our buyers buy. And, the whole theme here is we're signaling buyer safety, but no one's going to buy if they don't feel safe. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's one of our most important physiological, psychological needs is to feel safe. In COVID, we didn't feel safe. We didn't feel safe till vaccines came around, social distancing. So, in order to sell, you had to get someone to buy, and that buyer needs to feel safe.
So what does that mean, though? Let's go deeper on that, St. John, because
Sure.
I can say that all day, right? Oh, well, they're safe enough, but they're not. They're not. I mean,
No,
especially, with potential recession, right? That dreaded R word that scares the hell out of people. To your point, COVID is not over yet. It's better for sure, right? But it's not over yet. We have vaccines, but they're not 100%. RSV is big, right? We're looking at, still some crazy stuff happening politically in a lot of countries, not just the U.S. So how do we help our buyers feel safe? What does that mean?
So what it means, yeah, good. I want to unpack that as well. Is what I mean, because it's one of those sort of token things that people can throw out. Is basically humans crave safety. It's one of the first, Maslow's hierarchy. One of the first things we want is we want to feel safe. If we don't feel safe, what happens when you don't feel safe, Phil, in a situation? What do you do? What do you physically do?
Fight or flight, right? I've got,
exactly.
I get anxious, right? I get antsy, I run away, or I'm going to,
Yeah, exactly. So we fight or freeze, and it's a whole amygdala response, right?
Yep.
So it's our brainstem, our oldest part of our brain, that goes into fight, flight, or freeze. And the problem is if we're not selling with safety in mind and signaling safety by being non-assumptive about the sale, because this is the big thing, that stat around, the sales guys that don't perform is they're assuming they're going to get the sale because they're only concerned with their own needs. And like you say, they're not serving others. So when you assume the sale, you do not make the buyer feel safe. When you try and over control the sales conversation by focusing on your needs rather than theirs, your buyer doesn't feel safe. Like your Phil M. Jones, I was listening to his MPEG at your recommendation, and I've been listening to him in the truck as I've been driving around. And, I think he had a few beautiful ones. Is, you often signal to your buyer, if we get that far, because what we want to do is we want to constantly signal safety to our buyer that we're not overtaking the sale. We're not controlling the sale, because we as human beings crave to be in control. And that's what our brains are wired to do, because our survival is based on it. We need to control our situations so we don't feel empowered. We don't still feel safe. So we won't make a decision. And a very simple example, you go to Costco or Best Buy or whatever, and you run in there and, maybe you do what you want. And people say, oh, can I help you? Well, I certainly know down here. You go, no, just looking, thanks. Just looking, thanks. And you're blocking because you're protecting yourself from perceived loss, which is obviously loss aversion and Daniel Kahneman, all those kind of things. But basically what it means is I won't buy from you until I feel safe. So there's safety at the psychological level, at the physiological level, and then there's safety at the certainty level. And someone much better than me said, you have to be in an uncertain times selling with certainty. So when there is uncertainty, you need to sell certainty. And that comes into proof of product. It becomes into case studies. It comes to testimonials. So a buyer won't feel safe until they see certainty. So you need to give that proof. So again, we can all be great at talking, but actually, where's the walk instead of the talk? Where's the proof? Where's the truth? Where's the case studies? Where's the testimonials? Where's the endorsements? I'm going to feel a lot safer. Social proof. I'm going to feel a lot safer if you can point to similar businesses or similar farmers, in my case, that have used your product service and had great results. And by the way, talk to them. Don't talk to me.
Yeah. The more we can relate and connect their challenges to challenges that we've already solved, we're able to step out then and have that proof up there to make that safe, to let them see that it's not me saying that things are good. It's not me saying that I'm going to solve your problems. You've actually had someone here just like you that has had problems solved, right?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So we know as well from Cialdini, familiarity, similarity are really are those weapons of influences. And I can say for a fact, having been privileged to serve the rural sector for about 15 years now, farmers and growers and ranchers believe other farmers, growers and ranchers more than any eye candy on sales data or grass or forage or grain. They don't believe it. They listen to their own the most. So, we make sure we kind of recruit those alpha farmers who other farmers respect and listen to and go, oh, so Dave or Bill or Stu's using it. Oh, it's got to be good. So they're that risk is then reduced. But, the big thing there for the listeners is in uncertain times where sales cycles get longer, when there's uncertainty, we have to sell certainty. And that is what's going to make our buyers feel a lot safer, because you and I both know our biggest asset is the customers that we already have.
Yeah, absolutely. Referrals lower the deflector shields,
100%.
Real testimonials, not just crap ones like, hey, I really like working with Phil. But no. Sinjin, I work with, and I'm like you. I'm a farmer. I work in rural America, and the results he got me were outstanding. That's going to be a way better testimonial.
Yeah, 100%. Because literally before I was jumping on the podcast here, I was talking to a guy who sells to pistachio and almond growers in California, and we were talking to him, and he was saying, I got the marketing team in, and they got the cameras going, and the farmer was this is literally 10 minutes ago before we jumped on. And he said the farmer completely freaked out. And I said, look, you're just overdoing it. It's not natural. It's not authentic. It's not genuine. It's completely fish out of water for them. Why don't you just have a conversation like you and I having, Phil? It doesn't need to be high production values of me interviewing you and saying, hey, what were your fears and concerns before you used our system? Okay, so then, what were the results you started to see? And then, okay, so, if people were sitting on the fence here listening to this, what would your advice be to them? What would you say to them? And all he's got to do is ask 3 questions in that sort of testimonial template. But the point I'm making is farmers believe other farmers. And problem is, and I'm not trying to beat up marketing teams, but they get in the way sometimes. Now, we're in the sales camp, right? And we also do the marketing side, but the marketing guys can create too much noise in the sales process when someone actually just wants to sell. You just need to put them in front of the right person, which is a person just like them that runs the same farming system or has the same company. And they go, similar problem, similar solution, reduce risk, feel safe. I'm more likely to buy.
Wow. So right on, we look to be too polished and too fine and too pretty and too much, when in reality, to your point, we all want authenticity. But you also talk about in the book, you talk about empathy, which we could do that all day. But something you said, though, is empathy and intimacy.
Yes.
And intimacy. So talk to me about intimacy in sales, because that's something not a lot of people talk about.
Yeah. And I suppose that's like, it's not asking for a cuddle, because I'm not a big guy, so I can't cuddle most of my big dairy farmers, because they're all sort of ex-rugby, all black rugby players down here, because there's not enough of them. We're only a small nation. But The intimacy means that actually truly understanding what they care about, because in my world, farmers are some of the most emotional men and women you can ever sell and serve to. Because, so where that intimacy bit comes from in the book is because if you ask them what their farm and what their land and what their animals and what their homestead means to them, you can have them crying in 10 minutes. Big buggers who are, bloody 6'5" tall and pretty wide, solid fellow quarterbacks. I talk in rugby, you're talking NFL, but like they are big people, but they're incredibly emotionally driven, and those emotions are just below. So when I talk about intimacy, it's actually talking about the specificity of the questions and the curiosity of like, right, okay, so let's understand. So tell me, how does that feel? And it's really weird. So it sounds so counterintuitive, but like when I run my farming panels, people go to me, so what do you do, St. John? I go, well, I actually I get farmers to talk about how they feel. And they go, what the hell? What do you mean? And I go, well, farmers are feelers. They're not thinkers. They feel because they're very taciturn. They work with their hands. They're emotively led and driven. That's why they've chosen the career. That's the risk that they run against all the elements. So they're very emotional. So yeah, empathy's bandied around like that word authenticity. But I think the intimacy is truly understanding what is making that individual tick at that time, and understanding and dialing into their world and connecting with the conversation they're having, and not being afraid to talk to them about how they are feeling. In the sales conversation, what do you think about this? No one makes decisions rationally. They make decisions emotionally. And you can triple this for farmers. So how does this feel? How's that feeling? What does that feel like to you when you lose your milk production, or you've got lamb losses, or whatever it happens to be? So, we have to make sure that we are not afraid of being intimate, not in a romantic sense, but in a deeper sense, to actually really, really dial into the farmers. How are they feeling? What's going on? What does that mean for them? What are the impact? What are the implications? That's what I mean by that.
Yeah. So I appreciate all of that. And one thing that I see some salespeople do is that they focus on the illusion of intimacy. They skip the psychological safety, the buyer safety, and they just assume intimacy. Like maybe they've been stalking this person for years online, or perhaps, they've done all this research, and they find that the illusion of intimacy actually costs them sales because they haven't made it safe, right? They talk about, how are you feeling? And it's like, well, that's none of your damn business.
Well, it's certainly not the first. Exactly. It's certainly not the first question you ask. How are you feeling? How are you feeling about that? What we do is we want to have a breadth and depth of conversation. And as you know, we could talk 2 hours about this, is the question's the answer. So your sincerity of your intent is basically defined by the quality of the questions that you ask. So if you ask really good, deep, well-researched, specific questions to them that are evidence that you've listened to them and what they're about, they are going to be more intimate with you. You can be more intimate with them. And guess what? Your reward is more insight and more intel, which allows you to close the deal quicker than maybe another rep that couldn't command that same quality of conversation.
Well, it gets to one of the things that you said in the book, and that is that permission-based questioning, the paraverbal conversation, right? We have to ask permission, and I think there's a balance between permission and prescription, right? Permission, yes. Of course, right? We have to ask for permission, but we absolutely, once we know what the answer is, we have to be strong enough to prescribe and say, you know what, St. John, from what you told me, I'm going to stop wasting your time here. I know your arm's broken, and I'm going to cast that arm. I know the solution for you, and based on what you told me, here's what it is. Are you finding that as well? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. What it is we I use a thing called sentence starters. So, my favorite chat show hosts and my favorite journalists, whether you're Larry King over your way, Oprah Winfrey, or some of our guys down here, are guys and girls, or I'm showing my age because I'm English by birth. Like there was an old geezer called Michael Parkinson on BBC, and he was a real legend. And he used to put everyone at ease, apart from Meg Ryan, which was just a write-off. But anyway, story for another day. And so he would put his guests at ease. And so as a salesperson, when you put people at ease by asking for permission, like permission-based marketing, is, Phil, do you mind me asking? And then I ask you a really hard question, which is, Phil, hey, do you mind me asking, what does success look like for you? Or, Phil, do you mind me asking, tell me, what would a really good season look like for you? Phil, could I ask, if we were sitting down 12 months from now, tell me what a good season would look like? So that prefix softens a very hard line of questioning, and we call them sentence starters. And that's the stuff we put in the book and we put in the training, because it's not just what you ask, it's as most important is how you ask. And it's so important you get that right, because if you get it right, then you've got permission to get a greater depth and breadth of the response from your buyer and unearth or surface their true buying motive.
Yeah. And it allows us then, once we've asked for permission, it allows us to get more intimate.
100%.
It allows us to be more present. It allows us to really go deeper than just the. So what is that to? How does that feel, right?
Yeah, because what you're doing is you don't want to have a shallow sales experience. We have marketers that are banging on about customer experience, but you don't get the sales experience right. You don't have a customer experience. So in order to have that intimacy or that depth of response and trust and authenticity and genuine and the care, like, you're judged by everything that you do. Particularly in rural, we're heavily scrutinized because there's so many people that sell badly to them and give them such bad advice. So they take you all in, and character's really, really important. But you basically convey the sincerity of your intent that then gets you that intimacy by the quality of the questions you ask and the way in which you ask those questions. So when you ask really good questions in the right way, you're going to get into that depth that you wouldn't have a very shallow response otherwise, which doesn't give you insight, doesn't give you information, and doesn't allow you to qualify or disqualify your buyer.
Yeah, or to sell to the real need, right?
100%.
Or to sell to that real need, because that's missed.
So true.
Right. So one of our listeners today, Joseph D'Amato Jr., says authenticity and depth are so important, and Joseph, I couldn't agree more with that. And it's so often missed, right? So we should focus on feelings, as you mentioned in your other comment. Really, really important there. So, St. John, just a couple more questions here, buddy. Because authenticity and depth are so important, do you think that it's due to lack of preparation that folks don't get deeper, that they don't give more authenticity, or what do you think is kind of one of those blockers that might be preventing that?
Yeah, I think the main one is, I think most sales reps aren't trained in basic psychology, in the principles of human psychology. So you said something really, really good there, Phil. What you said was, if you don't create the intimacy, you won't get the depth. You don't get the true need, is what you said. You said you won't be able to unearth or surface the real reason they want to buy. So what I think that gets in the way of the majority of sales reps with their rural or their FMCG or whatever they're selling is they don't understand the basic psychology in the way that a buyer buys or the way that the brain buys. And so again, back to our earlier point is actually, we know humans are emotionally driven and they need to feel psychological safety. Now, we all know the very famous research study with Google, who obviously pretty wealthy business, know what they're doing, and their biggest result. And again, I was reading it this morning. I've been reading Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed, and I read all my books when my children get up because it gets too noisy in my household too, Phil. And I was reading it, and he reminded me again of the Google experiment. He said the reason why they get innovation is they make sure there is psychological safety amongst their teams and amongst their leadership, and that's where they create the innovation. But psychological safety is much, much broader, because if you understand how you need to be received by someone and how you talk to them, then they are going to be more open, more trusting. You're going to have that intimacy. You're going to have that depth. You're going to have that real reason why they want to buy. Because if they don't feel safe, they won't tell you anything. They'll just block you, put you away. They won't take your call. They'll ghost you. They won't return your emails. You've got to build that up over time. I mean, that's a whole nother subject about the pre-sale and how you position for the pre-sale, right? Because by the time you actually they need to know that you understand them and they know what they're about.
Yeah. Well, and not only do you know, but you actually care about what they're all about. I think that's important, right? You can't fake that. You have to actually care, and you have to be present with them. And that gets back to that empathy and intimacy, because it's not just them like psychologically cuddling you, but it's really you cuddling them back and understanding that we're trying to solve this problem together. And if I can, I will. And if I can't, well, then I'm going to send you to somebody who can.
100%. And that's the whole integrity, which again gets thrown around. But like, I think it was your man, Andrew Carnegie says, I do not listen to what men say. I watch what they do. So your actions and your behaviors say everything and tell that prospect everything. So in that pre-sale, for me, one of my favorite things, I send my favorite prospects books. So I've got a guy in Australia. He's a very big ram breeder. Those are rams with really big testicles, Phil, that basically mate to lots and lots of ewes for anyone that's not understanding what it is. And these guys are heavily endowed. And this guy, regardless whether we work him or not, he's a real good dude. I sent him a book and I posted it over. And it's the actions and the behaviors that are showing you have to demonstrate. You have to walk the talk. You cannot talk it. You have to walk it. You have to prove it with actions and behavior that you truly care, and invest in the sale before the sale. Because that's why, to me, again, one of my best, generosity is your best strategy. You and I cut from the same cloth. This is why you do the amazing things you do with your show and the amazing guests that you have on and all the content that you share for free. Like, that you are showing that you truly care, because if you didn't, you wouldn't.
That's right. Well, speaking about that, so last time we talked, you told me I should get a book. So to show you, I do care. I got
this one, right?
So
good.
Right. So I got that one. It's Not Today, The 9 Habits of Extreme Productivity with Eric and Mike Schultz. So we talked about this. I hadn't read it yet, truth be told, right? But I picked it up because I do care, right? I want to connect. I want to know, like, if you recommended it, you didn't recommend it on accident. You recommended it on purpose. And I think that's super important for folks to understand, is that when people say something, you need to take note of that. It's important. They're not just saying it to bloviate. They're saying it because it matters to them, especially in rural America, where farmers say less, but say more. Are you finding, is that
so
right?
Good. So true. It's the same the world over. They don't waste their words. And I'm unfortunately one of those people that do. And I'm a real work in progress on tone. So everything I've just told you, listeners, I'm not that. Just ask my wife about my tone and my delivery. There aren't many sentence starters that deliver with my children. But story for another day, Phil. But what it is, you have to show sincerity, and you judge that by the actions and the behaviors of people. You watch what they do, not what they say, because talk is cheap. We know the rest, right? So, yeah, it's very, very important to really, really tune in, take those notes. And it's funny thing is, it's the thought that doesn't count, not the thought that counts. The thought that doesn't count.
Say more.
What that means is, that old adage is like, it's the thought that counts. If you've ever forgotten your anniversary, it's the thought that didn't count, because you didn't make it count, because you should have thought of it and you didn't. So, again, I'm being paradoxical here. Like I was saying with the problem sales selling, is it's the little thought that doesn't count because you didn't make it count, because you should have known to do it. So you give yourself away. We give ourselves away so much. We think we're really immune to that. We don't understand that we give ourselves away by everything that we do. And a lot of it actually isn't to do anything with talking. It's the paraverbal, it's the non-verbal, it's our actions and behavior. It's what we do before the sale, what we do during the sale, what we do after the sale, what we say, how we represent our business or community or our church or organization, Rotary, whatever you're into. We signal so much that we are largely unaware of. But here's the thing, lots of people are. But the sick irony is that we're not.
Yeah. Wow. So the less sometimes we say, or the maybe less we prep, the more we're saying. Based on, which is basically saying, you know what, I don't respect you enough to prep. You're just like everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I got it mixed up, but what I see is like, what is it, like Mark Twain said, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time. And what he's saying by that is he didn't have the time and plan to prepare. So, everyone's so time constrained these days. Farmers, VPs, C-suite, whoever it was you're trying to get into, you've got to make those conversations count. And by doing that, you've got to be planned and prepared, and then you aren't going to waste your words. So you're going to have a higher the efficacy of your conversation, the quality of the conversation is going to be better because you've fueled it by the right research, all the prep. I think prep is very important. And that's why I said at the start of it, it's like, fake it till you make it is the worst advice ever, because I've seen people cruelly exposed following that piece of advice. So, that's why.
I would argue prep is love. Right, prep is love.
Yeah,
right? Because
so
prep shows
so
that you matter to me.
I cared.
That I'm going to spend time with you, right? I mean, for sure. Think about how much do we prep for a first date, and then sadly, how much do we prep for a 10th date? Right,
Yeah,
very different, right?
Big head, long tail. Big head, long tail. But I mean, you're an example of that, Phil. Every single guest you have on this show, you read the book. You show that you've researched the book. You've been through my book. You've read my book. I don't expect you to read my book, but you do. And you show that you care because you read the book, and then you ask questions from the book, and you talk to me and you say, hey, you said the problem with sales is selling. And I had to read it again. The problem with sales is selling. And, that is, I think one of my landmark ideas, not that I can copyright it. I'm sure someone much more intelligent than me came up with, but it's like, it's the truth. It's the truth. So, no, I really appreciate the fact you prepped.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. It's a pleasure to prep. So, and it's great to talk to you. So I don't know if I'm supposed to do this or not, but I saw in your LinkedIn profile that you're actually giving away a digital copy of your book. Is that right? Can I share the URL?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah,
cool.
100%.
Good.
So, they can go in there, and I mean, they can get the ebook. They can obviously go to Amazon, get the hard copy, the paperback if they want. But yeah, they can go in there, grab it, and obviously, easiest way to get hold of me is on LinkedIn if you want to shoot me a message. But again, I personally believe you have to earn the sale. You have to prove your rights, and you might earn that a bit slower. But I'm kind of more tortoise than hare kind of guy. So yeah, I'm very, very happy if your listeners want to grab a copy and they are involved in agriculture or involved in rural or farming. I think there's probably hopefully a fair few lessons for anyone that is in the rural sector or not. I think some of those principles of psychology, hope you'd agree, Phil, there's some content that really get you to think around human-centered selling, not selling, thinking about buying, supporting your buyers to make the best and most accurate informed decision for them. So, if people want it, please help themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's at Rural Sales Success, then the number 1.com/ebook. You can check that out. Now, friends, if you forget that, what I would encourage you to do is connect with St. John on LinkedIn. He's a great follow. He shares great stuff. He comments on stuff. Go to linkedin.com/in/St. John Craner. But St. John is spelled like St. John, STJOHN Craner, CRANER.com. If you're not .com, I'm sorry, just St. John Craner, STJOHN CRANER. If you're watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, you can see it down at the bottom of the screen. If not, then follow along. Or you can always check it out on my LinkedIn profile. It'll be there as well, so you can get to know St. John a little bit better. But St. John, I so appreciate you, man. The book was fantastic. I read it, and then I read it again today. Lots of stuff in there. Doesn't matter if you're in rural. The examples are rural, but the lessons are universal. I thought they were fantastic. The last question I got to ask you, though, you mentioned one book that you were reading now, but give me one other book that you're reading, that you're enjoying, that you're thinking about, or maybe the most gifted book that you've given away.
Oh, that's such a good, I love this because you and I, when we talked about a lot of the books you read, and I was scribbling down the books you read, and I had my big barrow full of bookdepository.com. That's where I get my stuff from. Sort of like the books that I think question is like the books that your go-to books, your best books, the ones that have the most. That's such a hard question. I would say The Talent Code by Dan Coyle is a terrific book, and it talks about practice and training and deliberate practice in a Malcolm Gladwell work. It's called The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, Coyle. And it's fantastic because it talks about how our neural pathways are basically has a protein that gets wrapped around it called myelin, which makes those neural pathways go faster. And this is why the most professional athletes, like our sales professionals that are listening to this podcast, can get better and faster at what they do, because they literally burn through deliberate practice those skills into their brain. So that's a brilliant book. And I love the sports analogies. I'm a big sports nut, so I really enjoyed that book. There's so many. So that was a hard one, but I would say that's up there. That's definitely in my top 10.
Fantastic. If I could recommend one book to you, my friend,
please,
it is The Rice and Beans Millionaire, Brian and Jeffrey Eisenberg. It's $1.99 on Kindle right now, and I'm having Brian on the show tomorrow. So
awesome.
Great show, great book, super easy to read. All of their books are really good. So yeah, and it's a fable, super easy to read. You'll finish it in 2 hours or less.
Good. Awesome. That'd be really good for my attention deficit. A bit like my
Same.
book. It's a very short book. You can just
Absolutely.
get through it pretty quick. A couple of hours and a bottle of wine, you'll be fine.
There you go. Well, I made sure I drank at least a bottle of wine tonight before I talk to you, because you fired me up so much, St. John. I so appreciate you, man. Your website, do you want let's put that back up there, ruralsalessuccess1.com/ebook to get a copy of the ebook. Get to know St. John Craner. He's got lots of great insight, especially for rural America, but not just for rural America. St. John, I appreciate you, bro.
Thank you, Phil. And if anyone is finding that URL, and I should have given you something simpler, if you just literally Google ruralsalessuccess.com, the words ruralsalessuccess.com, you'll find all the goodies that Phil's talking about. You find ebooks, you find training. Just help yourself. And again, just connect me on LinkedIn. Phil, I'm super grateful for you as well, buddy. Thanks for being such a champ.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Get a copy of the book, friends. Check it out and get to know St. John Craner.